Hello, everybody. Can you believe it? The Formula One season is just about to begin. We'll re-begin. I mean, come on, man. 5 weeks. This is longer than the winter break. It's unbelievable. But we are only about 9 days, 10 days away from Miami 2026. And that's what we're going to be focusing on mainly during the course of the program. Great to have Delucia back with us. But unfortunately, going to start off with a little bit of a somber note. And this is just a reminder, because sometimes we become incredibly desensitized. We believe that anybody is immortal when they get into any form of racing vehicle, whether it's a powerboat, whether it's a go-kart, whether it's a mini cross, whether it's motocross, whether it's MotoGP, whether it's tin top racing, whether it's Formula One, Formula Two, you name it. Anytime any person gets into a motor car to go and have a race. And this is also for the amateurs that are out there that go and do their regional racing at their favorite tracks and they've built their cars. They are putting themselves at huge risk because motorsport is extremely dangerous, regardless of all of the safety features that are incorporated when it comes to Hunt's devices for the neck, the crash helmets that they use, the various kinds of roll cages that are used in tin top cars, the incredible technology used in Formula One safety. There is always the possibility that something can unfortunately go wrong. And over this past weekend, unfortunately, we had two such tragedies. One was not a racing driver, but it was a fan. And those who have been lucky enough to go and watch rallying, unfortunately, also think that they are immortal. But a car coming at you at 160 kilometers an hour and you standing on the side of a bush, if that car gets it wrong, unfortunately, you are in tremendous amount of peril. And in Argentina, that happened over the weekend. And then, of course, the 24-hour at Nürburgring took place over the weekend. In one of the qualifying races, there was a 7-car pileup. And unfortunately, veteran endurance racer Joa Mittinen lost his life. So we should never, ever forget that any time we as fans of motorsport watch, you must understand that all of these drivers are taking a tremendous risk when they get into the car, on the bike, whatever it is. So to those who lost their lives over this past weekend, and those, of course, who are always in our thoughts over all of the years, we send condolences to your families and to your friends and to your loved ones. But we do understand that this is an incredibly dangerous activity that many, many people take part in. Okay, so before we talk about Miami and the rule changes that are going to come in, let's talk about a couple of other things that have been happening off the track as well. The one I wanted to speak about was a little bit about Aston Martin. And I know we have spoken about it in the past at length, but I'm very, very concerned that there is a complete dysfunction happening within that team.
There is, and I think, what I find so fascinating about this whole situation is the amount of money and the amount of, I want to say, really good PR the team had gotten building up to the regulation changes. They had said this was going to be our year. We brought in the big guns. Adrian Newey was going to be in charge, and can you believe it? He's not missed out on a podium since he's come into Formula One with his designs. And I think that alone says a lot about the mind and the brilliance of this engineer. But at the same time, we've said it before that there is a leadership imbalance and a structural issue where there are too many people who are in the incorrect positions, and seeing everyone just kind of leave, and then their issues with their power unit, seeing how they struggled even in the Bahrain testing and in the shakedown in Barcelona, it was quite disappointing to see where they ended up. And I mean, if we look back to Japan, for example, the vibration issues with their power unit, Alonso suffering with plenty of issues with his body, just saying he's lost fingers in his hands and toes, that situation alone is just dangerous. But, when we look at Miami, yes, we've had 5-week break, but what can they actually do in that break? Because from where I'm sitting, the main issue and the critical issue for them to look at is trying to figure out their power unit and how best to use this Honda engine in their car. It hasn't worked out for them. So how do they fix that at this point in time? Is it even possible?
Yeah, it was something that I alluded to last week, where I said, and we've seen this with teams in the past as well, and way before your time, back in 1985, there was a brilliant, brilliant designer who unfortunately is no longer with us, but his name was Harvey Postlethwaite. And Harvey Postlethwaite was brought into Ferrari because he was the sort of Adrian Newey, let's say, of that time. And Postlethwaite had decided no. Same with John Barnard, who also was approached by Ferrari and worked for Ferrari. Decided no, he was not going to work or go and live in Italy. And in 1985, there was a driver by the name of Michele Alboreto, also is no longer with us. And Alboreto against Alain Prost was just this most incredible battle. And that was how the title was going to go. And all of a sudden, they brought in Harvey Postlethwaite, and Postlethwaite was working in England. Maranello was doing its own thing. And all of a sudden, it didn't work. And Prost went on to win the championship very, very easily. And this is where I think there's, yes, this is imbalance, but there's also this huge disconnect because you've got Aston Martin based in the UK, which is in GMT time, etc. And you've got Honda in Japan, which is probably 9 hours ahead of them. You can't get things working. I mean, I don't care. Oh, well, okay, I'll wake up early to take the call. Your brain doesn't function that way. And Honda have had this problem before with McLaren years and years ago. And I just feel that if Aston are going to stick with Honda, they've either got to open up something in Japan or they've got to convince Honda to come and set up full base in the UK for them to get some kind of balance. And then, of course, understanding of what is needed instantly and immediately, as opposed to 9 hours, 10 hours. That's a big, big difference.
Well, here's the thing though. Why is it that Red Bull was able to absolutely get it right with Honda and the time difference is the same? It's boggles my mind because it's worked with one car manufacturer, but it hasn't worked with McLaren and it hasn't worked with Aston Martin. Yet Adrian Newey has done that with Red Bull. So is that really the only issue that we're seeing? Because I feel like there's a lot of things happening behind the scenes besides that. Because if Adrian Newey had done it before, multiple times and consecutively, it doesn't make sense that it's not happening right now. Especially when you look at a team like Aston Martin, where money is free flowing and they have the people they need to be able to turn this into a championship winning car. It doesn't make sense. Somewhere there is definitely a miscommunication. And I don't just think it's a time difference.
You know, take it from whence it comes. But Adrian Newey came out with a statement the other day that troubled me terribly, where he said the development of the 2026 car was on the wrong plane. Okay. So he's saying that Aston Martin, their team, before he joined, were doing things incorrectly. Now all of a sudden he's saying, oh, it's Honda who's got it wrong. And I agree with you. Somewhere along the line, there's just an imbalance, and they are stuck between a rock and a hard place at the moment. And, you know, let's hope that they can find some kind of normality amongst that team. Okay, so now Miami. There's been lots of meetings, Delucia. Oh, you cannot believe it. In the FIA, and then the Formula One, and then the teams, and then the drivers, and everyone. Oh my word, no, this doesn't work, and that doesn't work, and this is great, and let's try and do this, etc., etc., etc. One thing before we get into what they've decided for Miami, Stefano Domenicali, who I adore. I think Ferrari was so stupid to get rid of him. He did a brilliant job when he left at Ferrari. He left Ferrari, went to Lamborghini, and then, of course, became Liberty's head of Formula One. Now, I have huge respect for Stefano Domenicali, and I think he's one of the great Formula One people of many, many decades. But when he came and said, no, there is nothing artificial about the overtaking. Overtaking is overtaking. And his his defense of this was, for many, many years, we've had lifting and coasting, etc. And I spoke about this last week. I've said, of course, in the 80s, the cars were so thirsty that the drivers had to drive at some stage a little bit slower, but it all depended on the car that was behind him. And they drove slower themselves. They didn't drive slower with their foot flat on the accelerator and the car wouldn't go. That is where Mr. Domenicali has completely missed the point. Lifting and coasting, we know it. We saw it with Ferrari most of last year. They had issues with that. That I fully understand. Managing a race is all about these elements, saving the tires, fuel loads. All of these things, of course, are very, very important. But you cannot tell me that overtaking with your foot flat, with your pedal on the gas flat out, and somebody goes past you is not artificial. Then I'm terribly sorry, you are incredibly incorrect. And that is the only thing I will have to say about Mr. Domenicali. For the rest of it, yes, we have to be positive. We have to try and embrace these new regulations. However, we do know that they are horribly flawed.
And the thing is, I mean, the perfect example to disprove his argument is Lando Norris saying that his intention in the last Grand Prix was not to overtake Hamilton. He just naturally did it because the car did it for him. And I think that in itself is an argument on its own. And he's not the only driver to have said that. A lot of this is very much out of the control of the drivers. But I think when we're looking at Miami and the changes that are going to be implemented, I mean, they're still up in the air. They're deciding how to introduce the different phases of changes. What's going to change? Is it going to be qualifying? I mean, they tried that and it wasn't exactly what they planned out to be. So what other changes are there going to be for qualifying, for the race itself in terms of safety? I mean, the Behrman crash is an example of, you know, what we don't want to see in Formula One. And you mentioned in the beginning, it's an incredibly dangerous sport. These are very courageous young men who are going out every single weekend, basically, to do this. And for us, the main thing is safety. How are we going to change it? So I'm quite curious to see what they're going to decide, because I know that they're meeting today as well in a series of meeting coming up into Miami next week. So I'm pretty curious to see how things are going to play out for the rest of the season.
Yes, and on top of that, if they all of a sudden decide on the changes, and we'll go through what is suspected to change in Miami, if they decide, then surely this should become the formula. Surely you can't now just say, oh, for Miami, we're changing it because there's longer straights or whatever. And then Monaco, oh no, we go back to normal. Surely, if this does work in Miami, and let's go through it in a short while, then surely this must become the standard of the formula.
It also comes down to the fact that there are still teams who are arguing against it purely based on the fact that it's working for them. And Mercedes, let's be honest, has an illegal car. And they are well aware of that, and they still have time to play in the field of getting ahead of the field more than they already have. But yet they are like, oh, well, Red Bull didn't complain when they were leading. Yeah, but the circumstances are different. This is far more dangerous, and it's not just affecting one team who's running away with them. The same way you guys ran away, you know, when the regulation changed in 2014. This is completely different. And I've been watching it quite interestingly, because Andrea Stella said, we're aware of why these regulation changes have taken place and we've been trying to embrace it, but there are minuscule details that need to be redefined and need to be reestablished so that we can have proper racing. And that's essentially what we need to get into for the upcoming races for the rest of the year.
Yeah, it is complicated, and of course Liberty Media are going out and saying we should be positive, and of course it's PR talk. He doesn't want anybody talking it down, and especially the drivers, and he's had lots of conversations with Max Verstappen, and we know the truth. The drivers don't like this. They're not enjoying it. Tremendous amount of the fans think it is farcical. And my worst is, all of a sudden, because of the electronics, the software people are beginning to map the car so that it actually knows when to give power, in what corner, and how much power to deliver, as opposed to the driver. Now, I'm sure you've played a PlayStation. I'm sure you
Yes,
have.
I have.
Plenty of it. Now, when I play the PlayStation or whatever, I always have it on the manual mode where it shows me the green line and then orange and then red, etc., etc. So I know the line to go, oh, brake a little bit, etc. Now, if you take and play a PlayStation and you do it with that, but you have it on full automatic, you can keep your foot flat and the car itself will actually brake itself in those corners. And this is what Formula One to me is looking like at the moment. All of a sudden, the guys driving, oh, they run out of power. Now they just turn in the car and the software decides, okay, you're at 50 degrees turn in angle with this much grip. I'm going to give you 60% power. And from there, then I'm going to give you more. This cannot be racing. Cannot be racing.
This is exactly why we say this is Mario Kart, Sash.
That's it. It's like, and I don't know, this AI worries me. Now, okay, so let's go through what can happen in Miami next week. So, suggestions are no more limping on the straights. So, under the original 2026 rules, the cars were expected to run out of electrical juice, which we have seen halfway down a long straight, forcing drivers to let off the power. Okay, and that is what's called clipping, by the way, because I had to do research because I don't know what the super clipping means or whatever. Okay, and these then it fixes, ensure that the car keeps pulling all the way to the end of the straight. So the way that I understand it, the guys are going to be going flat out, then they're going to lift their foot on the gas to ensure that they've still got power.
Yeah. That's pretty much what it is. But I like your face, Sash, because that was my face. Because in theory, it makes sense. But in practice, I'm like, how is that going to work then? Because it still feels electric. It still feels like it's automated. And how are we going to manage that from a driver's perspective? Because again, it feels like it's still part of a computerized version of racing.
Totally. So the next thing is, of course, and this has been my bugbear from day one, faster qualifying. Qualifying is all about raw speed on the edge, using the curb, getting as close to the walls as possible. This is what Formula One drivers want. Okay, so instead of drivers having to save energy during the lap, they can now go flat out. So this means that qualifying laps will look and feel much faster like they do last year. So if they can go flat out during qualifying, then why can't they go flat out during the race? Or is it just because the energy is only there for 2 laps?
This is the thing for me, because you can now, in theory, set the amount of energy you have in a race then. Because if you can do it for qualifying laps and only give you 2, why can't I do it for 58, for example? It doesn't make sense to me. At least then incorporate that in a strategy way. Like let them play with it. You say you've got half of the race to play with, but it's up to you when to use that strategy. So for qualifying, you can go flat out, but for the race, you can maybe do half of it. I feel like there are other ways that we can improve it, make it more interesting. But I don't know. All these things just feel so needs to be fixed immediately.
Okay. So now they also, because of this, they're going to have better power management. And you're going, but if you could have better power management, why didn't you have it right in the beginning? Okay, so I've tried to work this out. So think of it like taking your phone battery and your charger at the same time. Okay, the car now can grab more energy while driving and spend it more effectively, so that the engine doesn't bog down. So what they're saying is you can get more energy, but then you're still clipping. I can't get
Everything
my head
feels
around how this does
contradictory.
work. Yes, it is. It's completely contradictory. Oh, you can get more power, but now you're telling me, but I can only use it in qualifying. But I'm giving you more. Okay.
But then it will still lead to clipping, which is what we're trying to avoid. So your solutions are creating more problems for the other solutions that you've tried to create. Ay, ay, ay.
So, I mean, listen, we've all realized that the 2026 cars might be slow on long tracks like Miami. So they're tuning the software and the energy rules to make sure that the racing stays high speed and aggressive, which again is software intervention as opposed to the driver being in control. And basically, it's sitting and saying, okay, put your foot flat. Don't worry, keep your foot flat. As soon as you get to turn 13 or whatever after driving at 350 k's an hour, the software will kick in and give you more power out of your battery. What's the driver doing? Holding on and going, oh, okay, here comes the power. Okay, turn. I mean, come on, man. Am I missing something? Am I really? I'm the most positive Formula One person in the world, and I seem to be completely befuddled by all of this, all of these newness that is going to come in Miami. None of it makes sense to me. I don't understand it.
Well, you and millions of other fans around the world, because your facial expressions and my facial expressions are probably reflective of a lot of the other people who are listening to these and unpacking it, because to be honest with you, they just don't make sense. Now, I also understand that when we bring in new regulations and changes, it does take a while to get used to. But when we're taking away from the authenticity of the crux of a sport or of a situation, it takes away from the enjoyment of it. And I've noticed that there is a lot of I want to say hatred for the sport and the regulations, and there are people who are optimistic, who try to be positive about it. But again, it just kind of feels like this year especially, if you've succeeded in your regulation changes and managing your power the best way possible, that's the only way that you're going to succeed, because it feels like the FIA are being very cautious about the changes. It's kind of like, let's try and experiment with this change. And like I said before, you're changing something only to have another change counteract it. So there's no change actually taking place. And our poor drivers who spent years of their lives being racing drivers and invested so much money, and their families who've been there from day one are now having to completely change their perspective on how to go racing, because half the time they can probably spend on the simulator, just mimicking when they need to deploy their batteries, when the car needs to function a certain way. You're basically mapping out a continuous route the whole time, and it's repetitive because you know exactly where you need to deploy your power on a track. It just becomes a disappointing form of art that we've loved for so many years. And now you're looking at it and it's just like, well, it kind of just feels like you're experimenting at this point.
All we know is that there are a lot of teams that will be coming to Miami with upgrades of the cars. Could be aero upgrades, etc. Could be software, AI, machine. I don't know. But we will still wait and get official correspondence from the FIA as to what is going to happen. To me, I assume qualifying is going to be the most important. Thereafterwards, watching a Formula One car going down the long straights of Miami, as we saw in China, and then just foot flat and no power. Unfortunately, that's not racing.